Hello and welcome to another episode of Digital Pulse, where we like to unpack these really complex topics and, try to make sense of the world around us.
Always a worthy goal.
It is.
Yeah.
Today we are diving into the Syrian conflict,
Oh.
but not the way you might expect.
Okay.
Our source is Yasir Siddiqui, who's a really sharp political commentator on YouTube.
Okay.
And speaking in Hindi Urdu, he breaks down this really, really complex situation
Okay.
in a way that honestly made me rethink a lot of my assumptions.
Interesting.
His channel is called @Yasir Siddiqui. So if you want to check him out.
Yeah, I'll have to look him up.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, Syria, man, it's been going on for so long now.
It
It's
has.
hard to even remember how it all started.
Right. And I'll admit my understanding of it initially was very basic.
Yeah. Like, what was your kind of initial take?
It was almost like Sunni versus Shia, just good guys versus bad guys.
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably fall into that trap.
Right.
It's easy to oversimplify things, especially when you're just getting headlines and sound bites.
Exactly.
But Siddiqui, he challenges this right away.
He does.
He really doesn't waste any time dismantling that kind of oversimplified narrative.
Yeah.
And one of the things he points out is that when figures like Saddam Hussein
Right.
or even Bashar al-Assad himself faced setbacks,
Okay.
celebrations erupted across sectarian lines. So not exactly what you'd expect if it were just a simple religious clash, right?
Not at all.
It's like there's something else going on there.
Yeah. It really makes you realize there are way deeper forces at work here.
For sure.
So how does Siddiqui break down the key players then, if it's not just about religion?
Well, he identifies 4 major factions,
Mhm.
each with their own kind of, motivations and goals.
Right.
And it's really fascinating to see how they interact.
So who are these factions?
So first you have the Assad regime itself,
Okay.
backed by Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Right. That's kind of one corner of this whole puzzle.
Exactly. They're like the incumbents, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The Assad regime, we've heard a lot about them in the news.
Right. They're kind of the known quantity in all of this.
Yeah.
But then you have HTS, formerly linked to al-Qaeda,
Okay.
led by this guy al-Julani.
Okay.
And they emerged around 2016.
Okay, so this was kind of later in the conflict.
Yeah, they kind of came into their own as a separate force, which added another layer of complexity.
So they oppose Assad, but they're also distinct from other rebel groups.
Exactly. They're not just lumped in with the rest of the opposition.
Okay, so we've got Assad and we've got HTS.
Right.
And who are the other players in this?
Well, it gets even more tangled because you have 2 more factions opposing Assad.
Okay.
You have the Syrian National Army, which is heavily backed by Turkey.
Right, and of course the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces.
Bingo.
Okay, so 4 major players,
Yep.
all vying for power.
And they don't always see eye to eye, even when they have a common enemy in Assad.
Exactly. It's not as simple as, for Assad or against Assad.
Right. It's like they all have their own agendas, and sometimes those agendas clash.
So much more complicated than it appears on the surface.
Right, and that's what makes this conflict so interesting to study.
And so hard to resolve.
For sure.
And what's even more fascinating is that Siddiqui argues that global opinions on the Syrian conflict,
Right.
they don't necessarily follow along traditional religious or political lines.
Yeah, I mean, you would think it would be kind of straightforward,
I would think so.
but he paints a very different picture.
Right. I would have assumed it was, okay, you're either with Assad or you're against him.
Right, you're either, pro-rebellion or you're, pro-regime.
Right.
But he gives examples of prominent liberal figures supporting the Syrian rebellion, while some conservative commentators oppose it.
It's wild.
He mentions Michael McFaul, who's a pretty well-known voice on the left,
Yeah.
and Dima Khatib, a Syrian activist,
Oh, okay.
both expressing support for the rebels.
Mm.
But then on the other side, you have people like Max Blumenthal, a left-wing journalist, and George Galloway, a British politician known for his socialist views,
Okay.
who are very critical of the rebellion.
Wow.
So it's like it completely upends our assumptions about who stands where on this issue.
And he even points out American conservatives like Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens, who have also been critical of the rebellion.
Exactly. It's a real mix.
Yeah, it's a real mix of perspectives.
It's not what you'd expect.
It really isn't.
It suggests that something else is going on here,
Wow.
something beyond traditional left versus right.
So what is that something else?
Well, that's where Siddiqui's proposed framework comes in.
Okay.
He suggests that the divide might be better understood through a lens of liberal capitalist versus socialist worldviews.
So instead of like religion or traditional political labels, he's looking at a different kind of ideological split.
That's right. He's saying it's not just about left versus right. It's about a different set of values and priorities.
So does this model perfectly capture the complexity of global opinions?
Well, that's open to debate.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, it is a model. It's a framework for understanding.
Right.
But it's a thought-provoking idea.
It is.
And it pushes us to consider alternative ways of understanding these global fault lines.
It definitely challenges the way I've been thinking about this conflict.
Yeah, it's like a whole new lens to look at things through. And remember, these are just frameworks for understanding a very complex situation.
Yeah.
There will always be exceptions and nuances.
Of course.
But what Siddiqui really drives home is that national interests, they often complicate matters even further. And they don't always follow predictable patterns.
Right, because it's not just about these like grand ideological struggles.
Exactly.
It's about like countries acting in their own self-interest.
Right, it's about real politics.
Real politics.
Yeah, you know, the nitty-gritty of international relations.
Yeah. So can you give us an example of how these national interests kind of complicate things?
Sure.
Like what about Iran and their relationship with Azerbaijan?
Oh, that's a great example. So you'd think Iran and Azerbaijan, both majority Shia,
right?
They would be like natural allies.
You would think so.
But as Siddiqui points out, they actually have a rather tense relationship.
Really?
Yeah, due to territorial disputes and, you know, various strategic considerations.
Oh, wow.
It's a reminder that realpolitik often trumps religious or ideological solidarity.
So even when countries share a common religious background, doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be friends.
Not at all.
Wow.
Sometimes national interests get in the way.
It makes you realize that countries, just like individuals, often prioritize their own self-interest above all else.
That's a good way to put it.
Right.
Yeah, it's like they're always looking out for number one.
And then you have Iran's relationship with Egypt.
Oh, yeah, another fascinating case.
Another one.
So Iran is, of course, a strong supporter of the Palestinian cause.
Right.
Which you would think
would align them with Egypt.
Exactly, because Egypt also has a strong interest in the Palestinian issue.
Right.
But he highlights how Iran's policies towards Egypt, especially regarding the Muslim Brotherhood,
so interesting,
have been inconsistent.
Okay.
And sometimes even at odds with Egyptian interests.
So even when there are these shared religious or ideological ties, national interests can still create friction.
Absolutely.
And lead to unpredictable alliances.
It's a constantly shifting landscape.
Wow. It's like you can never really predict who's going to align with who.
Exactly. And that's what makes studying international relations so fascinating.
It's like a puzzle that's constantly changing.
Right. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while someone's spinning it.
And Siddiqui makes this fascinating observation about the role of cultural narratives in shaping these dynamics.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
I love it when he brings in these unexpected examples.
He's full of surprises.
So what's the example?
He brings up the Turkish historical drama, Ertugrul.
Wait, Ertugrul, the TV show.
The one and only.
What on earth does that have to do with the Syrian conflict?
Right. It seems totally unrelated.
It does.
But Siddiqui argues that this show,
right,
while seemingly just entertainment, actually played a role in mobilizing support for the Syrian opposition.
Okay, now we have to know more.
Right.
How could a TV show have that kind of impact on geopolitics?
So the show glorifies this historical figure who fought against enemies of the Ottoman Empire.
Okay.
And it became incredibly popular.
Oh, I've heard of it.
Across the Muslim world.
Okay.
Including among Syrian refugees in Turkey. And Siddiqui suggests that this show, with its themes of heroism and resistance, it helped fuel this sense of solidarity and purpose among those opposed to Assad.
Wow.
So it's not just about the content of the show itself.
Right.
It's about the emotional resonance it creates.
Right.
And how that taps into existing political sentiments.
So it's like it's feeding into this kind of pre-existing narrative.
Exactly. It's providing a framework for understanding the conflict.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Powerful stuff.
It's the power of narratives to shape public opinion and mobilize people.
Exactly. And it's not a new phenomenon.
Of course not.
But this is like a really striking modern example.
It is.
It makes you wonder what other seemingly unrelated cultural products might be influencing the world stage.
In ways we don't even realize.
Right. It's like, what are we consuming that's shaping our worldviews without us even knowing it?
That's a great question.
It's a bit unsettling when you think about it.
It is.
But let's bring this back to Syria.
Okay, yeah.
We've got these complex alliances, shifting interests, the power of narratives all swirling around this conflict.
So what does Siddiqui say about the future?
What does he see happening next?
Right, because it feels like things are constantly in flux.
They are.
What's his take?
Well, he expresses concern about the potential for an HTS-led government in Syria.
Okay.
He believes that such a government would face significant challenges, especially when it comes to financial viability.
Why is that?
What makes him so concerned about their ability to govern effectively?
Right, because they're one of the major players now.
They are.
So why wouldn't they be able to govern?
He points out that HTS lacks support from major global powers.
Like who?
Like Russia, Iran, or the West.
Oh, so they're kind of on their own.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
And he thinks that that would make it difficult for them to govern.
Yeah, he says without that kind of backing, it would be incredibly difficult for them to rebuild and govern effectively.
I could see how that would be a major hurdle.
Right.
So who does he think they would turn to for support if they don't have the backing of these major powers?
He predicts that an HTS-led government would likely rely heavily on Turkey and Qatar for financial support, potentially shifting the balance of power in the region in a significant way.
Right, because Turkey's already a major player in the region.
They are.
And Qatar's got a lot of wealth. So it's like every move on the Syrian chessboard triggers a cascade of unintended consequences.
It really does.
Wow.
It's a complex web, that's for sure.
It is.
And Siddiqui doesn't stop there.
Okay, there's more.
He also raises concerns about increased Israeli assertiveness in the region.
Oh, that's right.
Following the weakening of the Assad regime. So he actually highlighted an article from the Jerusalem Post that suggested that Israel might see the weakening of Assad as an opportunity to advance its own interests.
So a weakened Syrian government could actually embolden Israel.
Potentially, yeah.
And that could further destabilize the region.
That's the concern.
Oh, wow.
It's like a delicate balance.
It is.
You know, on the one hand, Israel might view a weakened Assad as less of a threat.
Okay.
But a power vacuum in Syria could also create new risks and challenges.
Right, because then you have all these other actors vying for power.
Exactly.
And that could create even more instability.
It's a recipe for chaos.
So it sounds like the future of Syria is very much up in the air.
It is.
With a lot of potential pitfalls and very few clear solutions.
It's a tough situation.
It is.
But, you know, at least we're starting to understand it a little bit better.
Right.
And I think Siddiqui's analysis is really helpful in that regard.
It is.
Because we've gone from this simplistic understanding of Sunni versus Shia to a much more nuanced appreciation of the complex historical, political, and social forces at play.
It's so much more than just a religious conflict.
Right. It's about power.
It's about geopolitics.
It's about ideology.
It's about narratives.
It's about all of those things.
And we've seen how something like a TV show can unexpectedly influence global events.
It's wild, isn't it?
It is.
But it just goes to show you how interconnected everything is.
Right.
And how culture can play such a powerful role in shaping our understanding of the world.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel like I've only scratched the surface of this issue.
There's always more to learn.
There is.
But I think Siddiqui's analysis gives us a really valuable framework.
It does.
For understanding the complexities of the Syrian conflict and all the forces at play.
It's been a fascinating journey so far.
It has.
And I'm eager to continue this deep dive.
Me too.
And see what other insights we can glean from Siddiqui's perspective.
He's definitely got a unique take on things.
He does.
And I think it's really valuable to hear these alternative perspectives, especially on an issue as complex as this one.
So in part 2, we'll explore some of the potential scenarios for Syria's future.
All right.
And consider what role Turkey might play in shaping that future.
Sounds good.
Stay tuned.
So, you know, one thing that really struck me about Siddiqui's analysis is how he emphasizes that this conflict isn't just about these, you know, external forces vying for control. You know, it's also about the Syrian people themselves and what they want for their future.
That's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in all the geopolitical maneuvering and forget that there are real people whose lives are being directly impacted by all of this.
Totally. I mean, it's easy to get lost in the weeds of like who's backing who and what their strategic goals are.
But at the end of the day, it's the Syrian people who are paying the price.
Exactly. And Siddiqui really brings that home.
Yeah.
He reminds us that ultimately it should be the Syrian people who decide their own fate.
Okay, but with the opposition so fractured,
Right.
like, is that even possible?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, can these groups with such different ideologies and agendas,
right.
can they ever come together to
Right.
form a cohesive government?
Yeah, because it seems like they're all pulling in different directions.
They are, and Siddiqui seems to suggest that it's going to be incredibly difficult.
Okay.
Especially given all the historical tensions and mistrust.
Right, because these groups have been fighting each other for years.
Exactly. It's not like they're going to suddenly become best friends just because Assad's gone.
So even if they manage to overthrow Assad,
yeah,
there's no guarantee that they'll be able to create a stable and peaceful Syria.
That's the challenge, and Siddiqui really highlights that.
He specifically mentioned Turkey's potential role in all of this.
Yeah, Turkey's a big player in the region.
They are.
And they've been heavily involved in the Syrian conflict from the beginning.
So what does Siddiqui see as Turkey's main objective?
Well, he argues that Turkey's influence will be crucial.
Okay.
Especially if a group like HTS,
right,
which lacks broader international support,
right,
if they were to gain power,
okay,
Turkey would be in a really strong position to shape the future of Syria.
You know, if we remember that Ertugrul example we talked about earlier, it seems like Turkey's already demonstrated its ability to shape narratives and mobilize support within Syria.
Exactly. They've shown that they can influence public opinion.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful tool to have in a situation like this.
Absolutely. So Turkey's involvement adds yet another layer of complexity to an already intricate situation.
It does. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube.
Right.
That's constantly changing colors.
It's a reminder that we can't just analyze the internal dynamics of the Syrian conflict in isolation.
Right.
We have to consider the regional and global players.
Exactly. Who are influencing the course of events.
Because those players often have their own agendas.
Right.
That might not align with the best interests of the Syrian people.
That's a bit of a sobering thought.
It is.
So what are some of the potential scenarios that Siddiqui outlines for the future of Syria?
Like, does he offer any glimmer of hope?
Yeah. Does he see any path towards peace and stability?
He paints a rather uncertain picture, to be honest.
Okay.
He highlights the immense challenges that any future government will face, regardless of who's in charge.
So even if the opposition were to unite and form a government, he doesn't think it would be smooth sailing.
Not at all. He thinks it would be incredibly difficult to rebuild the country, to heal the divisions, and to create a functioning state.
And he's particularly concerned about the financial stability of a potential HTS-led government. Right.
Yeah, that's a big concern for him.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. He believes that without support from major powers like Russia, Iran, or the West, HTS would struggle to rebuild the country and to maintain even basic services.
So it's not just about like ideological differences or political rivalries.
Right.
It's also about like practical matters.
Exactly. It's about having the resources to actually govern.
To like keep the lights on.
Yeah, to provide basic necessities to the people.
To rebuild the infrastructure. And as we discussed earlier, he predicts that Turkey and Qatar would likely become the primary financial backers in that scenario.
Yeah, they would be the ones footing the bill, essentially.
Which could have a ripple effect across the region.
Absolutely.
Potentially reshaping alliances and power dynamics.
It would definitely shake things up.
It seems like any outcome will have significant consequences that extend far beyond Syria's borders.
It's like a stone thrown into a pond.
Right.
The ripples spread out in all directions.
And Siddiqui doesn't shy away from discussing the potential negative consequences of the current situation. Yeah, he's not afraid to talk about the dark side of things.
And he specifically mentioned the rise in Israeli assertiveness in the region.
Yeah, that's a big concern for him.
What are the implications of that?
Well, he highlighted an article from the Jerusalem Post that suggested that Israel might see the weakening of the Assad regime as an opportunity to advance its own interests.
So with the Syrian government weakened, Israel might feel emboldened to take a more aggressive stance.
That's the concern.
Which could further destabilize the region.
Exactly. It's a very delicate balance.
It is, because on the one hand, Israel might view a weakened Assad as less of a threat.
Right.
But a power vacuum in Syria could also create new risks and challenges.
It's a double-edged sword.
And this highlights another layer of complexity in the Syrian conflict.
Okay.
The role of external actors with competing interests.
Yeah, you've got all these different players with their own agendas.
And it's like everyone is trying to make the best of a bad situation. But their actions often have unintended consequences.
It's like a game of chess where every move has the potential to backfire.
And it seems like every move on the Syrian chessboard has the potential to trigger a cascade of unintended consequences.
It's like a chain reaction.
That are difficult to predict.
Exactly. You never know what's going to happen next.
So despite the recent changes in Syria, there's still a long and uncertain road ahead.
Without a doubt, the situation is far from resolved.
And Siddiqui stresses that the need for peace and stability in the region has never been greater.
He really emphasizes that point.
But achieving that peace will require navigating a complex web of political, economic, and social challenges.
It's not going to be easy.
It's not.
It will require a lot of effort and a lot of goodwill from all sides.
And it will require a deep understanding of the historical context.
Yes.
The motivations of the various actors involved.
Absolutely.
And the aspirations of the Syrian people themselves.
We can't forget about the people at the heart of all of this.
Right.
They're the ones who are ultimately going to have to live with the consequences of whatever happens next.
And Siddiqui's analysis provides a valuable starting point.
He does.
For that understanding.
Yeah, he gives us a framework for thinking about the conflict.
Challenging us to move beyond simplistic narratives.
Right.
And engage with the complexities of the situation.
He encourages us to ask tough questions, to consider multiple perspectives.
To not just accept the easy answer.
Exactly.
To really grapple with the nuances of this conflict.
It's a call for thoughtful and nuanced engagement with this critical issue.
It is.
And a reminder that the Syrian people deserve our attention and support.
They do.
As they navigate this tumultuous period in their history.
It's been a truly eye-opening discussion so far.
It has.
I'm eager to see where this deep dive takes us next.
Me too. In Part 3, we'll explore some of the broader implications of the Syrian conflict and consider what lessons we can learn from this complex and evolving situation.
Sounds good. Stay with us. As we've been going through Siddiqui's analysis, it's become really clear that the Syrian conflict is about so much more than just like, who controls what territory on a map.
Yeah, it goes way deeper than that.
It's about like the future of the entire region. The effectiveness of the international system. Like how do we deal with these kinds of conflicts?
Is the system even working?
And even the role of culture. In shaping global events.
Like that Ertugrul example.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was mind-blowing.
It really was.
I'd never thought about a TV show having that kind of impact.
Me neither.
But it makes sense when you think about it.
It does.
Like stories have power.
They do.
They can shape the way we see the world.
And they can inspire us to act.
Exactly.
One thing that really stuck with me was Siddiqui's point about the long-term consequences of this conflict.
Yeah, he's not just focused on the immediate situation.
Right. He's thinking about the bigger picture.
The ripple effects.
Exactly.
Like how this is going to shape the world for years to come.
And he argues that it has exposed some fundamental flaws in the international system.
Ooh, that's a big claim.
It is. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So he points to the international community's inability to effectively address the humanitarian crisis in Syria.
Okay, so despite all the talk about human rights and the responsibility to protect, the response has been inadequate.
To say the least.
To say the least.
It's been fragmented.
Yeah.
Uncoordinated.
And often just too little too late.
Exactly. And the Syrian refugee crisis has had a profound impact on countries around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, millions of people have been displaced, forced to flee their homes.
And they've ended up in all corners of the globe.
Right. And the response has been very uneven.
It has. Some countries have been much more welcoming than others.
So Siddiqui sees this as a symptom of a deeper problem.
Okay, what's that?
The lack of a unified and coherent approach to dealing with conflicts like this.
Okay.
He argues that the current system is ill-equipped
to
handle the complexities of modern warfare.
Right, because it's not like traditional warfare anymore.
It's not.
It's not just armies clashing on a battlefield.
Right. There's so many other factors involved.
You've got non-state actors.
Right.
You've got proxy wars.
Propaganda.
Cyber warfare.
It's a whole different ballgame.
It is, and the international system is struggling to keep up.
So it's not just about these specific actors involved in Syria.
Right.
It's about the systemic weaknesses of the global order itself.
That's what Siddiqui is arguing.
Yeah.
He's saying that the Syrian conflict is like a canary in the coal mine.
A warning sign.
Exactly, a sign that something's not right.
And he suggests that This conflict is a symptom of a larger malaise.
Okay. What does he mean by that?
Like a kind of global power vacuum.
Oh, interesting.
Where national interests often trump collective action.
So it's like everyone's looking out for themselves.
And nobody's willing to take responsibility for the bigger picture.
And that vacuum allows conflicts to fester and escalate,
leading to immense human suffering and instability.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is, and it's really disheartening.
It is, but, Siddiqui doesn't pretend to have all the answers.
Of course not.
He simply raises these issues as points for reflection.
Okay.
Urging us to consider how we might build a more just and effective international system.
So it's a call for deeper engagement with these global challenges.
Yeah, we can't just bury our heads in the sand.
Right. These are problems that affect all of us.
They do, whether we like it or not.
And he reminds us that the Syrian conflict is not just a distant tragedy.
Right. It's not something happening over there.
Exactly. It has implications for all of us.
And those implications can be very real and very immediate.
Can you give some examples of how this conflict impacts our lives, even if we're, thousands of miles away?
Sure. Well, for one thing, the refugee crisis has had a significant impact on countries around the world. We've seen political and social tensions rise in some places,
right,
as they struggle to accommodate large numbers of refugees.
And those tensions can lead to all sorts of problems.
They can, increase xenophobia,
right,
discrimination,
political instability.
It's a whole mess.
And then there's the issue of terrorism.
Right.
The Syrian conflict has created fertile ground for extremist groups like ISIS.
Oh, yeah. They thrive in chaos and instability.
Exactly. And those groups pose a threat far beyond Syria's borders.
They do. They have global ambitions.
So the conflict has contributed to global instability and insecurity.
It's a big part of the puzzle.
It's a sobering reminder that we live in an interconnected world.
We do, and what happens in one part of the world can have a ripple effect on the rest of the world.
And Siddiqui's analysis challenges us to recognize that interconnectedness.
Yeah.
And to take responsibility for addressing these shared challenges.
We can't just sit back and watch.
Right. We have to be active participants in finding solutions.
Exactly.
It's a call for empathy.
Understand.
And a willingness to work together to find solutions.
It's a tall order, but I think it's one that we have to strive for.
Well, this has been an incredibly thought-provoking journey, exploring the Syrian conflict through the lens of Yasser Siddiqui's analysis.
It really has. He's given us a lot to think about.
We've moved from this very simplistic understanding of good guys versus bad guys,
right,
to a much more nuanced appreciation of the complex historical, political, and social forces at play.
And we've seen how seemingly unrelated things like TV shows can have a surprising impact on global events.
It's all connected.
It is, and we have to be aware of those connections.
And we've been challenged to think critically about the role of the international community.
Yeah, and our own responsibilities as global citizens.
So what can we do?
What can we do to make a difference?
Right, because it can feel really overwhelming.
It can, but I think the first step is to stay informed.
Okay.
To educate ourselves about what's happening in the world.
Right, to not just turn away from the difficult stuff.
Exactly, because if we don't understand the problems, we can't possibly hope to solve them.
And we can support organizations that are working to help those affected by the conflict.
Yeah, there are a lot of great NGOs out there.
Doing really important work.
Providing humanitarian aid.
Right.
Advocating for human rights.
And even just having those conversations with friends and family.
Yeah, spreading awareness, raising consciousness.
Because sometimes just talking about these issues can help to make a difference.
It can plant a seed.
Exactly.
And who knows where that seed might lead.
Well said. So thank you for joining us on this episode of Digital Pulse.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time. Keep those minds curious.
And those hearts open to the world around us.
We'll see you next time.